It started with a bark. Not just any bark, but one so sharp, so sudden it stopped an entire classroom in its tracks. A retired police dog lunged at a peaceful mural inside an elementary school, tearing through paint and canvas to reveal something no one ever expected. A hidden steel door behind the art. What was buried behind that wall had been forgotten for decades. Until now. If you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe, like the video, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Now let's jump into the story. It started with a bark, not a playful bark or a lazy afternoon woof. This one was sharp, sudden, like a warning shot. It echoed through the painted halls of Fernbrook Elementary and froze everyone in place. Inside room 3B, Holly Lynn's 5th grade art class had just begun. The air smelled of wet paint and paper. Students were hunched over their desks, dipping brushes into small plastic trays, trying to paint the happiest memory they could think of. Laughter and the gentle scrape of bristles filled the room. Then, bark. Every head turned toward the corner, where Jasper, the school's K9 companion, sat up from his usual nap spot near the storage shelves. He didn't look relaxed anymore. His body was stiff. His ears stood high. His eyes locked on the giant canvas that covered nearly the entire back wall. Holly dropped her paintbrush. "Jasper?" she asked, stepping around a student's desk. "What is it, boy?" Jasper didn't move his eyes. He let out another low growl, one that made the windows seem to vibrate. Students stopped painting. A few whispered. One boy stood to get a better look. That's when Jasper charged. The 10-year-old German Shepherd dashed across the room, knocking over a stool and sending a tray of green paint flying. He leapt at the canvas, teeth flashing, claws scraping. In one swift motion, he tore through the lower half of the painting. The fabric ripped with a terrible sound like cloth being shredded by metal. The class screamed. Paint cups crashed. Desks clattered. Holly rushed to grab Jasper's harness but hesitated. He wasn't being violent, he wasn't attacking anyone. He was focused. In the torn opening of the mural, something strange was visible. A handle. It was small, rusted, and embedded into what should have been a concrete wall. But this wasn't regular drywall, it looked like steel. And behind it was a faint outline like a door sealed long ago. "Everyone out," Holly said, her voice shaking. "Out. Now." Principal Mira Dalton, alerted by the noise, arrived just as students were filing into the hallway. Officer Nolan, Reeve, the local community liaison and Jasper's handler, wasn't far behind. "What's going on?" Nolan asked, kneeling beside Jasper, who had now backed off and was sitting quietly, like a guard dog waiting for something. "He tore the mural," Holly said breathlessly. "There's a door behind it. I've never seen it before." "You sure?" Nolan asked, gently rubbing Jasper's side. "I've worked here for 9 years. That painting's been on the wall since I arrived. I just thought it was decoration. My uncle gave it to me when he passed. Said it belonged here." Nolan studied the exposed panel. "That's not normal architecture," he muttered. He gave Jasper a pat. "Good boy. You knew something was off." Principal Dalton stepped forward, trying to remain calm. "We'll need to evacuate this wing just in case." Nolan nodded. "We'll treat it like a safety check. I'll stay with Jasper until the fire crew arrives." The hallway outside buzzed with students whispering, making wild guesses. Some said Jasper found a bomb. Others were sure it was a ghost. A few were convinced there was treasure behind the wall. Inside the room, it was just Nolan, Jasper, and the strange metal handle. Nolan squinted at it. No dust. No cobwebs. It had been sealed, but not forgotten. He glanced at Holly, who hadn't left yet. Her hands trembled as she leaned against a bookshelf. "I swear, I didn't know that was there." "I believe you," Nolan said quietly. "But Jasper doesn't bark for no reason." He turned back toward the panel. Something about the air felt heavy, not dusty or moldy, but like the room itself was holding its breath. Nolan reached out and tugged on the handle. It didn't move. He tried again, this time pulling harder. A soft metallic groan echoed from within. The wall shifted slightly. It was a door. Officer Reeve, said Principal Dalton behind him, her voice hushed. The district needs a report before we go any further. I've called the fire department. Let's wait for them. Nolan looked at her, then at Jasper. The dog was still sitting, ears pointed forward, eyes locked on the crack that had formed where the door met the wall. He was waiting. All right, Nolan said, rising to his feet. But we don't tell anyone what we saw yet. Agreed, Dalton replied. Outside, the sirens were getting closer. Inside, the room was silent again, but not peaceful. It was the kind of silence that came right before a story began. A real one, and Jasper, the dog who barked at a painting, had just turned the first page. The metal door gave way the next morning. It took 2 firefighters, a crowbar, and a bit of luck. When it finally creaked open, it released a long breath of stale, cold air, like the room behind it had been holding on to time itself. Officer Nolan Reeve stood beside Jasper, who sat still, tail stiff, ears alert. The old dog didn't bark this time. He just watched. The opening was narrow, just enough for a person to slip through sideways. Behind it, a narrow stairwell disappeared into darkness. Principal Mira Dalton looked nervous. How deep do you think it goes? No way to know until we check, Nolan said. He clipped a flashlight to his jacket. I'll go down first. Jasper didn't wait for permission. He pushed forward and padded carefully down the stairs, each step causing a small echo that made the space feel larger than it seemed. Nolan followed. The stairway opened into a small basement room. No windows. No lights. Just stone walls, tiled floors, and the quiet hum of silence. It smelled old, like forgotten books, metal, and something else, something chemical. He swept his light across the room. On one side, there were 3 tall metal cabinets, the kind you'd find in a government office. A few stood slightly open, revealing folders and dusty film reels. In the corner was a projector, its power cord coiled like a snake. A folding chair rested near it, and next to that, a cracked mug with the word Best Dad printed on it. But it was the wall behind it all that stopped Nolan cold. A mural. It was different from the one Jasper had torn upstairs. This one was simpler, clearly done by a child. Stick figures stood beside what looked like a building with a red roof. A dog was painted in the corner, large and friendly, with a name above it. Blitz. Jasper stared at the mural. Nolan knelt beside him. You know something, don't you? He whispered. Back upstairs, Holly Lynn waited by the classroom door. She hadn't gone home. She couldn't. The mural that had covered the entrance to this hidden room had come from her uncle. A quiet man who rarely spoke about the past but had always painted with stormy colors and careful hands. He had died 5 years ago. No family but her. No explanation for the art he left behind. Now part of that art had opened a door to something buried. Down. Below, Nolan snapped photos with his phone. He opened one of the cabinets. Inside were dozens of folders marked with strange acronyms. Echo 17, Trial Class, Observation Notes. Some of them had dates from the late 1970s. Others were unmarked. He pulled one out. Inside were drawings. Childlike. Crude. Faces with large eyes, dogs with names like Comet and River, and repeated symbols. A bluebird, a triangle, a clock with no hands. On the back of one page, written in smudged pencil, were the words, "He said it helps me forget." Nolan sat back, feeling a chill move up his spine. This wasn't just an old storage room. Someone had used this space, used it to study maybe, even test children. He turned toward the stairs. We need backup down here, he called up. By the afternoon, yellow tape blocked off the classroom. A local historian, Dr. Halem Vicks, was called in. He was tall, wore glasses too big for his face, and carried a rolled-up map under his arm. I looked up the buildings past, Vicks said as he joined Nolan in the basement. Fernbrook Elementary was built in 1985, but before that, this site was used by the Department of Public Education. Education? Nolan asked. Well, that's the story. but records show that in the late 70s the department leased this space to a private research foundation. The details are fuzzy. Convenient, Nolan muttered. Dr. Vicks pointed to a locked cabinet. If there are more files in there, we might be able to figure out what kind of research they were doing. They managed to open it. Inside were more folders, older now, yellowed paper, brittle edges. One folder had no label. Nolan opened it slowly. Inside was a black and white photo of a girl, about 10 years old, sitting beside a German shepherd. Her face was smudged and no name was listed, but beneath the photo was a phrase written in shaky handwriting. I remember only when he's near. Nolan looked at Jasper, who now lay quietly beside the mural. The dog hadn't taken his eyes off the painting. They used dogs, Nolan whispered, to help the kids remember, or forget. Dr. Vicks nodded slowly. That would make sense. Dogs are emotionally grounding. Some people call them memory anchors. As the sun set that day, the room grew darker, and the hallway above fell silent. Holly stood near the window of her classroom, watching the last light fade. She didn't say it out loud, but a question haunted her thoughts. What if that girl in the photo wasn't just part of the research? What if she was someone real? Someone I knew? The news of the hidden room spread fast. Fernbrook Elementary was quiet the next morning, but not in the usual sleepy way. It felt tense, like something heavy hung in the air. Parents whispered. Teachers walked the halls with worried eyes. Principal, Mira Dalton, spent the morning on the phone with district officials, trying to stay calm while answering more questions than she had answers for. Downstairs, room 3B remained locked, guarded by 2 officers. Behind that torn mural and the steel, toward the past sat waiting, dusty, strange, and still very much alive. Officer Nolan Reeves stood in the basement again. This time he wasn't alone. Beside him was Professor Lenley Hoth, a retired linguist and codebreaker who had once worked with Cold War-era archives. Tall and quiet, Hoth ran his fingers gently across the child-painted mural on the back wall. There's a pattern here, he said softly. These aren't just random shapes, the triangle, the bird, the clock with no hands. These were used in visual memory stimulation exercises. Like therapy? Nolan asked. Not exactly, Hoth replied. More like experiments, designed to either trigger or suppress memory depending on the goal. He stepped back, studying the painting as if it were a puzzle only children could solve. Holly Lynn stood near the door. She hadn't wanted to come back, but something kept tugging at her like a string tied to her chest that pulled tighter each time she tried to walk away. When she saw the drawing of the dog on the mural, painted in warm brown with the word Blitz above it, her heart skipped. I used to have a dream, she said quietly. I'd be walking down a long hallway. There was always a dog beside me. I never knew his name, but I remember feeling safe. Nolan looked at her. You think it was Blitz? She didn't answer. Instead, her eyes filled with tears she didn't fully understand. Professor Hoth turned toward them. Do either of them? You know someone named Leif Oren? Holly blinked. That was my uncle. Hoth opened a folder he'd found earlier. He worked as a contracted artist for the Department of Public Memory Projects. Small team, off the books. According to this, he helped create visual cues for children enrolled in something called Project Echo. Nolan's stomach turned. That's what we saw in the files. Echo 17, Echo 12. Yes, Hoth nodded. Echo was the name, given to children believed to have experienced memory fragmentation due to early trauma or more deliberate causes. Holly gripped the edge of a chair. Are you saying my uncle painted things to help kids remember things they weren't supposed to forget? Or things they weren't supposed to ever remember? Hoth replied. In the hallway above, a familiar voice echoed. Kayla Roan, a high school junior with a podcast mic in her hand and determination in her step. Officer Reeve, she said, appearing in the doorway. I've been doing some digging. Can I show you something? Nolan nodded, leading her outside. Kayla pulled up a document on her tablet. I searched archives from the 1970s, newspapers, government lease records, military base maps. Guess what was here before Fernbrook? A research facility, Nolan said. Exactly, she replied. Only it wasn't labeled that. It was called the Rosemont Program. No address, no staff names, just funding records and shipments. Boxes labeled. Training materials and animal units. One order, 23 German Shepherds. Nolan looked down at Jasper, who was now lying quietly in the sun near the school steps. It was real, he said. All of it. Kayla nodded. And Officer Reeve. I think one of the kids from the project might still be alive. That evening, Nolan returned to the basement. Holly was already there, sitting beside the mural. Her fingers traced the painted bluebird. I think I was here, she said, not looking at him. I don't remember details, just pieces. A woman with glasses, a hallway that smelled like bleach, a red notebook, and always that same dog. She paused, her voice catching. I never had a childhood dog, but I've always dreamed of one. Nolan sat beside her. Memory doesn't always disappear. Sometimes it just hides. Jasper stirred near the doorway. He let out a low, steady whine and stared at the floor tiles again, the same corner he had sniffed on day one. Nolan stood. Let's check. Together, they knelt beside the floor. A faint seam ran along the tile's edge. Nolan pried gently with a crowbar. The tile lifted with a quiet pop, revealing a hidden compartment just beneath. Inside was a thin leather folder and a cassette tape labeled in black marker. Echo Subject 17, Session 4. Nolan turned the folder over. It was stamped in red. Confidential. Do not destroy. He opened it slowly. Inside were sketches, faces, buildings, and one of a young girl holding hands with a dog. In every drawing, the same triangle, bird, and clock symbols appeared. And in the bottom corner of the final page, a signature H.L. Holly Lynn stared at the initials. I didn't sign this, she whispered. But I think I drew it. The tape clicked into place. A dusty old player, borrowed from the town's library archive, sat on a folding table inside a mobile FBI trailer parked behind Fernbrook Elementary. Officer Nolan Reeve stood by the window, arms crossed. Holly Lynn sat across from him, her hands shaking slightly. Outside, the sun was setting. Inside, the past was about to speak. The tape whirred. At first, just static. Then, a voice. Faint. Childlike. A girl. I saw the bird again, she whispered. It was flying over the hallway, blue like the sky. He said if I keep painting, I'll remember. But I'm scared to remember. There was a pause. A deeper voice followed, calm and firm. Describe what the dog did today. He sat by the door. He always knows when they're coming. I named him Blitz. He doesn't like the man in the coat. The tape clicked. More static. Then silence. Holly didn't speak. She stared at her hands like they belonged to someone else. I don't remember that, she finally said. But I do. Nolan nodded slowly. You were Subject 17. She looked up, eyes wide. You didn't just teach in the room, he said. You lived in it. Before it was ever a classroom. Before they changed the walls and called it a school. Holly stood, walked to the window, and stared at the playground. Kids had once run there, laughed. Now it felt like hollow ground. Why? Would my uncle bring that painting back? She asked. Why hang it in my classroom? Nolan reached into his coat and handed her a letter. We found this in one of the drawers under the basement floor. It had your name on it. Just your initials. H.L. Holly opened it. The handwriting was shaky. Familiar. You were never supposed to stay here. But I couldn't undo what had been done. So I left the painting. I hoped it would remind you, not of the pain, but of the strength you had to survive it. You loved the bluebird. I remember. It was signed, Uncle Leaf. A tear slid down her cheek. He remembered for me, she whispered. That night, Holly didn't go home. Instead, she stood in room 3B for hours, alone, staring at the newly exposed wall. She brought her own paints and brushes, and began to paint again. Not the same dark shapes her uncle once used, not symbols or hidden messages. This time she painted a sky, soft blues, gentle whites, and in the center a single bluebird. When Nolan returned the next morning, the painting was complete. "It's beautiful," he said. "It's honest," she replied. By then the story had reached national news. Headlines called it, "The School, Beneath the Surface." Reporters swarmed the small town. Parents demanded answers. Officials opened investigations. But what stuck with people most wasn't the files or the Cold War secrets. It was Jasper. Photos of the elderly K9 standing guard. In front of the torn painting filled newspapers and websites. Children wrote letters calling him a hero. One message said, "Thank you for barking the truth." Jasper didn't understand the attention, of course, but he seemed calmer, like he'd finished something important. 1 week later, something unexpected happened. An old woman from a nearby town contacted the school. She ran a rescue center for retired service dogs. Years ago, she'd taken in a black and white border collie. He'd arrived starving and afraid with no name, until one day, he responded to a single word, Finn. When Holly heard the name, her breath caught. She remembered it now. Blitz was the one from her dreams. Finn was the one who had been there before the dreams. She asked to see him. The next morning, the woman brought the dog to Fernbrook. He was older, now. Slower. But as soon as Holly knelt, the dog walked straight to her and placed his head on her knee. She cried openly, no longer afraid to feel what had once been buried. Nolan watched from nearby, arms folded, heart full. Something old had been broken, but something new was beginning. The school board decided to transform Room 3B into a memorial gallery. It wouldn't display historical plaques or war trophies. Instead, it featured children's artwork from all over the country, paintings about hope, healing, and truth. Holly's bluebird hung at the center. Below it, a plaque read, "To the children who were forgotten, to the dogs who remembered." Nolan didn't go back to normal patrol duty. Instead, he started working with schools across the state, teaching students how to listen, speak up, and trust their instincts. As for Jasper, he retired for real this time, sleeping most days under Nolan's porch, always with one ear alert. Sometimes at night, Nolan still returned to the old school grounds. One evening, he stood outside the basement door, now sealed forever, and listened. No sound, but somehow he still felt it. A story that was never supposed to be told had been heard, and somewhere, in a place memory can't touch, the bluebird waited, still flying, still free.